amendments. So 13 is supposed to abolish slavery, 14th is citizenship and equal protection. Fifth is voting rights for black men, because women aren't allowed to vote for quite some time. We have the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau, so that's education and labor contracts. This is a program that's built to support freed black slaves, because now they have freedom, but it's very hard to transition into society because they might not have certain skills that everyone else does. They have like wage labor and they've already been working. So there's different kind of skills, you know, outside of people. There are slaves that are working in households and they only have a certain set of skills, like running a household or being a slave in certain like aspects of the colonies. So we talk about different types of slavery. There's the caste system, there's gang labor and wage labor. So where you're at, New York, Carolina, and Pennsylvania, all different types of like state policies and economies. So that's why everything is really fractured during this time, because states are kind of acting independently and they're not like a cohesive country. Does that make sense? Kind of, everybody's different in different states. Okay. We have the rise of black political participation. So that's with voting rights for black men. And then Reconstruction ultimately fails because there's a lot of racism that's still here. We have the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, which is really super racist and still part of society today. I would say there's a lot of it in MAGA too. Sorry, there's a lot of white supremacy that's still prevalent today, and we can kind of compare that to KKK. Violence in Northern Retreat. So key terms, we have Black Codes, Radical Republicans, Reconstruction Acts, KKK, and Compromise of 1877, ultimately leading to the end of Reconstruction. So key terms, those are exam terms. That's part of that. So chapter 16, I'm having it in chapters too, so you know where to look in your book if you're kind of confused as far as content-wise. So chapter 16, we have America's Gilded Age, so 1870 to 1890. Main idea is there's a lot going on. We have big businesses, the wealthy barons. So we have Andrew Carnegie, we have J.D. Rockefeller, we have Vanderbilt, and also J.P. Morgan. So J.P. Morgan Chase, that's the bank still around today, named after that dude. He was a banker. And we also have the creation of monopolies during this time. So that's why we have the Sherman Antitrust Act that's passed to help prevent monopolies. The railroads, the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad is really important because it's kind of enforcing this idea of Western expansion. A lot of resources and money are being poured into the Transcontinental Railroad, so that is affecting trade, it's affecting how crops and everything are being transported all around the country during this time. There's a big gap between rich and poor, so the 1%, the top 1%, like this eat the rich kind of sentiment that we have today, that's in the Gilded Age. And some people say that we're still in the Gilded Age right now, or at least they're comparing it like right now with the giant wage gap. That is the Gilded Age. So because there's so much of a gap between rich and poor, there's a lot of labor strikes, people are pissed off. There's a lot of factories being made, like the steel factories are really shitty, horrible working conditions. Everybody's really pissed off because all of these dudes are getting rich off of their labor and they're not getting paid enough. So we have the Homestead strike, we have the railroad strike. Steel is being used for the railroads, so there's that too. Carnegie Oil, so that's oil production. And government policies that favor business, so that's laissez-faire. That's also a term in your textbook as well. So key terms that we have during this, there's Second Industrial Revolution, social Darwinism. So we have like survival of the fittest. I don't know if you've heard that before. Maybe, kind of, cool, love it. Knights of Labor, Gospel of Wealth, Interstate Commerce Act. These are different key terms. There's more that are in your lectures as well. This is just some of the really important ones that we need to understand. So with the industrialization of America during this time, there's a lot of infrastructure. Like we said, westward expansion, there's a Union Pacific Railroad, there's a Pacific Railroad. But there's just a lot going on for the Gilded Age. And because people are so pissed off, then we have the populist movement. So the populist movement is what we talked about this last week of content. Populist movement is a bunch of farmers that are banding together because they're getting really fucked by the dudes from the Gilded Age because of crop yields. It's affecting not only working conditions, but we have like the American Federation of Labor, and people are starting to unionize. So we had like Samuel Gompers, which we talked about last week for American Federation of Labor. Like we've covered a lot of stuff so far. It doesn't seem like it because it's like, what's going on? But we've covered a lot of stuff. So in chapter 17, we also have segregation, so disenfranchisement in the South, so it's Jim Crow. We heard of Jim Crow. Jim Crow was also Childish Gambino for This Is America was doing Jim Crow caricature in his video. That's who he was representing. He was talking about the Jim Crow era, which I thought was really interesting. So populism, yeah. Farmers revolt against corporate power. Immigrants and new immigrants, so that's also a little bit of the Chinese Exclusion Act. There's a lot of like xenophobia that we talked about kind of leads into this chapter, because we also looked at last week 100 years of xenophobic legislation that was passed that is actually excluding Chinese immigrants, like legally it's allowed during that time, taking them away from society, which is really messed up. We said gender and label struggles, so expanding public roles for women. So we had, I think, Jane Addams. Yeah. Jane Addams will be one of your key terms, so she's a part of that as well, which we had in the lecture that was posted. So U.S. imperialism, that's when you have the Spanish-American War, the Philippines, and debates over empire. There's also Cuba during this time that's talked about. There's a lot going on. The Spanish-American War was only a couple months, but there's a lot that happened during that time. And then there's also the Philippine-American War that happened. So there's just a lot of content. So if you're feeling confused or you're feeling overwhelmed, like this is the time to ask, so you can kind of go over it, kind of like make sure you feel good about next week because it is our midterm. And that way we know like what works for our study and what doesn't work. If there's a certain component of the midterm that we just feel doesn't work out, then I'll adjust that for the final. But it's important that we're all in conversation with each other, and if there's something that's just like, this is horrible, I don't ever want to do this again, then take that into consideration because I want to make sure that we're succeeding and we're working together like as a class. So I hope that helps. What's really important too during this, when we're talking about segregation, so there's Plessy versus Ferguson. Have you ever heard of this? Homer Plessy, who is identified as 7/8 Caucasian and 1/8 African. He sat in I think it was a whites only car. Yeah, a whites only car, and so the Constitution was saying this like idea of separate but equal. Kind of. There's the segregation during this time. There's like certain things, certain areas that are like for blacks only, for coloreds only, and then for whites, like restrooms. In our lecture 2 for segregation, there's a picture of a man drinking, and it's only from a colors only water bin, which is horrible. So that's for that. And we also talk about lynching. So lynching, have you ever heard of that? Yeah, lynching is horrible where they hang people hanging on by trees, really horrible things that just happen.
They just started bringing that back recently.
Lynching's been happening forever.
They've been trying to do that again?
They have been doing it, yeah. There was the last recorded one in the 80s, but it's been happening since the 80s. It's just either not being talked about or it gets like brushed to the side, but just recently this year there was a man that was lynched. It's pretty horrible. And also for the Charlottesville that happened a couple years ago, they were trying to lynch people. It was really horrible. So this is not that far. I mean, it seems far away because it's in a history book, but it's not. So key terms: Plessy versus Ferguson, lynching, the People's Party is also known as the Populist Party, Pullman strike, and anti-imperialist league. Then we're kind of going into the progressive era, so Jane Addams is referenced again throughout this chapter. So it's a reform movement responding to industrial capitalism's excesses. Progressive era, women are starting to become more into society. They're really all about voting because they're pissed off too, because the abolitionist movement was also kind of at the same place as the feminist movement because they were both being excluded from society. But then once black men were able to vote, women were still placed at the bottom of the social hierarchy because women's suffrage was ultimately like not a thing. Because men didn't want women to be able to participate in society and advocate for themselves, so that's also shitty. So we had Jane Addams and Florence Kelly, Ida Tarbell. Political reforms during this time, we had direct primaries, initiative, recall women's suffrage. So as we're moving a little bit closer to 1920, when women are allowed to vote, we're starting to see this really big movement. We're seeing first feminists. There's a lot going on socially and politically. Like, this is a crazy time that we're talking about in this class. The important precedents that we're looking at is Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson. So the new rules for government. We're looking at ideas of nationalism following the Philippine and Spanish War. We also talked about nativism too for the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was the last class as well. Nativism is kind of just putting people that were born here above those categories. So that's what nativism is, kind of goes hand in hand with nationalism. Then we're also looking at the expanded democracy and social control. So with the progressive era, this idea of democracy, people rallying around the flag, a lot of American exceptionalism. There's a lot going on under Teddy Roosevelt, FDR. And with Teddy Roosevelt, we also have the New Deals. Well, actually, that's FDR. But we're moving towards the New Deals. So we have muckrakers, we have the Settlement House, we have Pure Food and Drug Act, 19th Amendment, the Square Deal, and New Freedom. We also have what is called yellow journalism. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's like history. He's out here like, oh yeah. Thank you, Ashley, for your head now. And chapter 19, so we have United States in World War I. I'm also going to have this on Canvas too, just so you can have it as a reference. This is just so we're kind of talking about where we are, and also so I can kind of see your faces and who's confused on what. So I'm constantly looking at eyebrows, furrowing, or just lost, big eyes. We look okay. We're awake, so I like that. That's cool. Main ideas, we have U.S. neutrality and entry into World War I, so that's in 1917. So Woodrow Wilson's his 14 points and vision for a world order. For the mobilization, we're looking at propaganda, espionage, and sedition act. When we talk about people being mobilized, that's like trying to get them to come together. When we hear people, like societies getting mobilized, women being mobilized for women's suffrage, that's what that means. Like the war efforts that we're talking about. So women in the workforce, there's also like mill girls, there's women that are working as like and the Great Migration. So the Great Migration is also kind of piggybacking in our chapter 17 and 18. So everything's building on each other culturally as we're moving forward in history. So the Red Scare, this is like crazy stuff going on. And repression of dissent. So our key terms in this are 14 points, Elective Service Act, Committee on Public Information, the League of Nations, Treaty of Versailles, and the Red Scare. Red Scare, when we hear that, it's in reference to communism. So we're gonna Red Scare, McCarthyism, a little bit. It's very scary to be a communist. It's basically like the Salem witch trials. So you can just say that everybody's okay. So major themes across 15 and 19. So we're looking at freedom, like our textbook is called Give Me Liberty. So we're looking at definitions of freedom. We're looking at definitions of liberty, who's a part of society, what is citizenship, who's like included in legislation. We're seeing the American government also playing a massive role in oppression. American government is legally allowing people to be racist. It's in their legislation with the Chinese Exclusion Act that we saw specifically. The separate but equal, like the Constitution is not protecting free black people, free black men. That's what we saw with Plessy versus Ferguson. Like the American government is actively oppressing people of color, communities of color. So there's that as well. So emancipation, that's being freed from slavery, to go with democracy, is constantly being tested and so they can challenge ideas of freedom that we've talked about throughout this class. The government is changing, so Reconstruction with progressivism, we're looking at a very big period of change. Economy, so our global economy was founded by slavery, everybody was a part of slavery, and that was really what is foundational for the creation of America and the United States is slavery and the economy from slavery. And then we move on to capitalism, and that's a big deal. That's crazy stuff, y'all. So inclusion and exclusion, some race, class, gender, and tensions, so intersectionality is a big deal as well. We're talking about segregation, we're talking about Chinese immigrants, not only in mining, but also in like the laundromats that we talked about. We were talking about laundries and soap last week, with those racist soap posters. A little bit. Are you here for History 121?
Huh?
Are you here for History 121?
Yeah. My apologies for my tardiness.
What's your last name?
Barbosa?
Manuel?
Yeah.
Yo, where have you been?
I've been home.
Oh, well, that's not good for me.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm glad you showed up. That's helpful. We did do a lot of review right now, but this will be on this will be in campus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Okay, you're welcome. Key figures. So we have Frederick Douglass, and that's with the Reconstruction. He wrote a book, The Narrative of Frederick Douglass. Very exciting piece of literature. We're born. Thaddeus Stevens is also part of Reconstruction. Carl Sumner. Oh, okay, we got a lot of work to do.